Hello, Philosophy 102. Okay. Um, this chapter's going to be a bit different. I'm going to try something that I have not tried in previous years because I think it's very important. So hopefully, you guys will get on board with that or maybe be excited about it. Chapter 4 focuses on credibility. And normally, I focus my lessons on the evaluation of the credibility of both sources and claims, um, specifically numbers 1 through 3 here. So, and that's usually where I leave off. But given the current political climate and the role that news media and media in general plays in our political reality, I feel like we should take some time to use what we learn in sections 1, 2, and 3 to apply it to specifically analyses of media biases and claims we hear in the media, from the media, and about the media. So should be a little different, but I feel like a lot of this is going to be intuitive to you guys. I'm sure you're aware of the conversation about uh, media influence. We've heard the expression fake news. There's a lot of discussion about whether or not social media creates like an echo chamber or should be considered legitimate news. So we're going to take some time to have a discussion of that, and I would love to hear from you guys with regard to how you think this section goes and what you think of me including it. So, and whether or not it's helpful. So definitely would love to get feedback on everything we talk about today. So jumping right in, for the sake of expedience, I've skipped a bit of the earlier parts of the chapter. There's a story about, a phishing scam, and there's also a particularly graphic story about a man who falls for a scam that it ends up getting him killed. The textbook mentions these. I'm not going to focus on them. It's a bit ghoulish, to be honest. So I'd rather just get into this directly. But so to do so, there are two arenas in which we assess credibilities. The first of that is the claims themselves, right? And the second is the claims sources. So we're just going to go ahead and claims, and we're going to leave ourselves some space, and then source of claim. Right? And we're going to add to these as we go and talk about how to assess these things independently, and then ultimately, figure out the credibility of both and the claim and how seriously we should take a claim we come across. So I like the example they use here, and I'd rather just focus on that. So if we're told that ducks can communicate by quacking in Morse code, we dismiss the claim immediately, right? If I told you ducks quack in Morse code, I don't know if you guys all know what Morse code is, but it's a series of long and short beats or noises or sounds, right? So if you're told that the duck's quacks are actually in Morse code, you would probably dismiss that immediately offhand. That's nuts, right? Such claims lack credibility no matter where they come from. So the problem with this is the claim itself. The claim is frankly absurd. So they talk about this concept of initial plausibility. We're going to skip over that, and we're going to compare the claim that ducks, let's highlight this, ducks communicate by quacking in Morse code, with another claim, ducks mate for life. Right? So we can't dismiss the claim that ducks mate for life out of hand. It's not at all outrageous. It might be true. It is a credible claim. So the content of this claim, ducks mate for life, requires some further investigation. Right? We can't just dismiss it out of hand, but we probably also don't want to accept it for no reason either, right? So whether or not we should believe it depends on its source. So we can't rely entirely on just our analysis thinking about this. Well, do ducks mate for life? What have I heard about that? Does that seem true? I don't know. We can't just assess the content of the claim. We need to ask who said it. If we read it in a bird book or heard it from a bird expert, we're much more likely than to believe it if, they heard it from the editor of this textbook, or I don't know, just somebody you're out to lunch with or something like that, right? Unless that somebody happened to be a biologist or something. So for the claims that aren't, that have some initial plausibility, we need to look a bit further at the source of the claim. To move more quickly through this section, I've just gone ahead and highlighted the real thrust of this section. So there are always two questions to ask about a claim with which we're presented. First, does the claim itself lack credibility? And that is, when does the content present a credibility problem? And second, when does the source of the claim lack credibility? So we're going to look at the claim itself first, and then we will move on to how to assess the credibility of the source of the claim. A very general rule for looking at the claim itself is a claim lacks inherent credibility to the extent that it conflicts with what we have observed or what we think we know, our background information, or with other credible claims. So this is quite a lot, but I do want to put it all in our notes. So there we go. Let's line this up a little bit. So we've got three things here, right? Our observations, our background information, and other, the degree to which it conflicts with other credible claims. So if, for example, to keep the duck example going, you have heard that ducks are notorious philanderers, then you have a claim that conflicts with the claim that ducks mate for life, right? That seems problematic for it immediately. So that's the degree to which it conflicts with other credible claims. Maybe you have studied ducks and you have some background information about avian animals in general, and none of them mate for life, right? That's not true at all. But in fact, I believe it is true that ducks do mate for life, or certain types of ducks do. But let's say you have some background information. Or let's say you have personally observed ducks engaged in philanderous behavior. They just added a duck pond, and one duck is just going around mating with all the other ducks. That's here. It's that in that case, that claim conflicts with something you have personally observed. So we're going to break this down and talk a bit more about these three things, and then we will move on to analyzing the source of the claim. So first, when we are confronted with a claim that isn't, just obviously true or false, the first thing we can ask ourselves is, does the claim conflict with our personal observations? So I just want to add this to our notes. And we don't really need to say much more than that about it for now. That's step one. Does the claim conflict with our personal observations? So I gave you an example, but let's take a little more time with this. Again, the authors of our textbook are named Moore and Parker. So they invite us to imagine that Moore has just come home from Mr. Marcus. I've heard some people say you should say Marquis. I don't know. I'm going with Marcus. A mutual friend of his and Parker's, and he has seen his new red Mini Cooper automobile. This is kind of antiquated language there, right? He meets Parker, who tells him, I heard that Marcus has bought a new Mini Cooper, a bright blue one. Moore does not need critical thinking training to reject Parker's claim about the color of the car because of the obvious conflict with his earlier observation. Right? Just straightforwardly, this claim does not align with my personal observation. It doesn't take a whole lot of assessment, but we would want something as certain as having personally seen the car, right? We don't want to say, in my personal observation, it's immoral to eat chocolate cake, for example. That's not going to count as a personal observation. And even if you infer something from that, like I watched somebody eat chocolate cake all day, every day, and then, they died of a heart attack or something. Therefore, it's bad. I watched all this happen. I observed it happening. You're making an inference there. It's not as straightforwardly an observation. There's a lot of thinking and induction that you're using there to come to that conclusion. So I really want to emphasize that we would want it to be a very firm conflict with a very clear personal observation. We don't want any vagueness or ambiguity as to what we actually observed. So be very careful with that. Oops. And so I do want to draw everyone's attention to this funny bit of the textbook. There are some claims from Weekly World News, as well as normal newspapers or non-satirical, non-tabloid newspapers that are quite funny. Statistics show that teen pregnancy drops off significantly after age 25, which, right, if you think about this for a minute, I've had students say, like, I don't get it. 25 is not teen. Like, this is definitionally true. They've not actually... It wouldn't just drop off significantly. It would drop off entirely after age 19, right? Just by definition. Homicide victims rarely talk to police. Right? Well, of course not. They are victims of homicide, so they have passed away. Some of these are just funny. But the textbook has this really interesting next section. Part of the reason I was so adamant about being skeptical of our observations is that they can go very wrong in ways other than that silly chocolate cake example I gave. And this is, since the publication of this textbook, this information has become a bit more popular, so I'm going to make a few suggestions as we move through this, just because I think it's important. So there's this section right here about personal observation failing. All of this is true. I encourage you to get out your copy of your textbook and click on this link if this interests you, if you have a future career in law enforcement, criminal justice, practicing law, perhaps. Maybe some of you would like to be attorneys. This is incredibly important. So seeing a blue or red car, again, it was blue or red, is pretty obvious. But we need to be a bit mistrusting of our observations as well, a bit skeptical of them. We don't want to be credulous. And the reason for this, and the reason I spend so much time on what seems like a fairly easy, obvious point, is best articulated in this little section. So I'm going to scroll back up. We've got a picture of an attorney appealing to a box of jurors. And that's because, let's just read it. According to the Innocence Project, which is a group in New York that investigates wrongful convictions, eyewitness misidentification is the single greatest cause of conviction of innocent persons. Of all the convictions overturned by DNA analysis, witness misidentification played a role in over 75%. Let's just highlight that. I mentioned that there are other resources. There's actually a program on Netflix. It's a series. I believe it's called The Innocence Files. It is a documentary done in conjunction between Netflix and the Innocence Project. And they really elaborate on how often our observations can fail us, our personal observations, which is what an eyewitness is. And I'd strongly encourage anyone who has an interest to also go watch that. I mean, obviously, trigger warning. It deals with criminal activities, and there's some graphic violence in there. So this is by no means mandatory. I just find this absolutely fascinating and extremely important. So let's continue. Of the first 239 DNA exonerations, so an exoneration only occurs when you conclusively prove that a person is innocent post-guilty conviction. So exoneration is done forever and ever. This person has been conclusively proven innocent. There are 239 that they're analyzing here. 62% of the defendants were misidentified by one witness, right? And we say, okay, well, I see how we could be, one person could be mistaken. But this is the fact that really blows me away. In 25% of cases, so slightly more than 50 people out of this 239, in 25% of cases, the defendant was misidentified by two witnesses. And in 13% of the cases, the same innocent defendant was misidentified by 3 or more separate eyewitnesses. If this beggars belief, again, they cover some of these cases in that Netflix documentary series and explain how this happens. This is personal observation failing at the highest level. And it should be very good incentive for us all to be skeptical of our own observations. Maybe this is the first time this has really seemed like a philosophy class to you, because it's kind of trippy, like, don't trust what you see. It's not what I'm trying to say, but definitely be aware that it can fail. Our senses can lead us astray. They can be wrong. You can walk into a house and think you smell freshly baked cookies and actually, get very hungry and be like, oh, I want to eat whatever this is, but actually it's an air freshener, right? You don't want to eat that. Your senses have failed you. Sorry, that was silly. This is very serious. Even though eyewitness testimony can be persuasive before a judge and jury, it may be much more unreliable than we generally give it credit for being. That's the real emphasis here. Just be aware. There's not much more you can do about it other than, being aware. Okay, so less serious now. We're going to move on past that, but I hope that does resonate with you all. And if you have any questions about it or would like further information about that particular failing of personal observation, please feel free to email me or reach out. This is something I am very personally interested in. So, what's going on when innocent people are misidentified by 3 or more separate witnesses? Well, there are some questions we can ask ourselves. So our observations and our recollections of them can go wrong for all manner of reason. An observer might be tired, distracted, worried about an unrelated matter, emotionally upset, feeling ill, and so on, right? I know that I have thought I saw something that I just simply didn't see, entirely because I was very tired. If you have ever driven late at night, you may have experienced this. You think you see something on the side of the road and you flinch at it and you're like, oh no, I'm just exhausted and a bit distracted. But also, There are physical conditions, right? If you're driving late at night and you think you see something by the side of the road and then, oh, no, there was nothing there, um, it could be a case of bad lighting, right? There could be a lot of noise. You could think you heard something that you didn't. Or maybe the noise is just creating a distraction, right? The speed of events can affect our observations. So I'm not telling you to just constantly doubt yourselves. I'm saying we definitely need to take into consideration the way our observations can go wrong. So if you would like, we can add some of these to our notes. But I think they're pretty apparent, and you don't need to run through a whole litany of things that could go wrong when you're interrogating your own observations. You can just say, like, oh, well, was I hungry? Was I in a rush? Was it dark out? Etc., etc. So these are pretty accessible to us, but they don't always come readily. The idea of being skeptical of our observations doesn't always come readily to mind. So that is the difficult task in this. So it is also important to remember that people are not all created equal when it comes to making observations, right? There are lots of people who see better, hear better, and remember better than you or I, right? If somebody is taking notes, if somebody is a journalist, if they're trained to observe. At recent protests, you may have read about or personally seen, there are legal observers who attend protests entirely to observe. They're not participating in the protest. They have giant shirts, well, maybe not giant shirts, but shirts with giant letters on them that say legal observer on them. And it shouldn't be surprising to us that somebody who has come to a place to offer this service to everyone, the service of observation, might be, better equipped to remember events, and their observations may be more reliable than ours. I think these people are incredibly important. If you don't know about them, they're very interesting. They're usually lawyers themselves or legal students, law students. So very interesting, right? And another reason they're important is that our own hopes, beliefs, fears, and expectations can also affect our observations, right? So it's just kind of nice to have an objective viewpoint where this is not, particularly influencing our thinking. So I like their example. Tell us that a house is infested with fleas, and we are apt to see every little black bug as a flea, right? If you just mention spiders to me, I get like itchy and kind of flinchy. We're kind of programmed this way, right? And conversely, if you inform someone who believes in ghosts that a house is haunted, she may well believe she sees evidence of ghosts. There's some interesting research here about this, actually, but we're going to move through it kind of quickly. So there are skeptic societies. I don't know if you guys are aware of them. Sometimes they do funny things. So at seances, which a seance is meant to be like the summoning of a spirit, staged by the Society for Psychiatral, I don't know how to say that, research to test the observation powers of people under seance conditions, some observers insist that they see numerous phenomena that simply do not exist. If you're curious about this, these are links in your textbook that you can go investigate. The textbook goes a bit off topic down here, so we're just going to move past this. We will pick up a discussion of wishful thinking in chapter 6. But I think you guys probably get the idea of this section. Oh, this entire section also has these really fun little optical illusions in them. So as demonstration, I suppose, of the way observation can go wrong. So these two tables are identical in size and shape. I also checked it with a ruler because I didn't believe it. um, in the middle of, saying maybe my observations can go wrong, I was still skeptical. But it's true. They are the exact same size and shape. So you can check that out for yourself if you are still like, no, my observations are never wrong. So let's move along to our next section. Does the claim conflict with our background information? Okay, I'm going to add that to our notes. This is where we move on. Let's say that a claim passes this first test, right? It in no way conflicts with any personal observations. In that case, we're going to move on to asking ourselves, does this claim in any way conflict with our background information? So what is background information? Our textbook defines it as just the immense body of justified beliefs that consists of facts we learn from our own direct observations and facts we learn from others. It's a broad definition, but that's okay. We consider it background information because maybe we can't specify where we learned it, unlike something new that we know because we witnessed it, for example, this morning. So much of our background information is well confirmed by a variety of sources. I like the example they give here. It's very straightforward and simple. We would, for example, reject the claim that palm trees grow in abundance near the North Pole, even though we're not in a position to confirm or disprove the statement by direct observation. This is an example of background information, right? We have some well-confirmed, justified beliefs about palm trees and the climates that they enjoy. We also have a lot of background information about the climate of the North Pole. Maybe we have seen some pictures of the North Pole, not enough to count as, observation, but we know things about the North Pole, right? And we also know things about palm trees. This is just all background information that's going to allow us to just reject the claim palm trees grow in abundance near the North Pole. That's pretty straightforward. As with anything, you could be given a lot of evidence that might cause you then to reassess the reliability of your background information. But it's straightforwardly false that palm trees grow in abundance near the North Pole, and you don't need to justify your rejection of that beyond saying, I have plenty of background information about the two objects of discussion in that claim. So we're going to just add to our notes another little section, which is, oh no, we should probably number it, right? I don't want to capitalize it, conflict with other claims. Does the claim conflict with other claims? And other claims can be included in our definition of background information. The textbook doesn't instruct us to do this, but I like to keep this separate, simply so we can identify these other claims and then decide which claim is more likely true, right? So just to talk about this a little more, let's use the palm trees and North Pole example. So we have claims about where palm trees do grow in abundance, right? When I gave us the list of reasons we have for rejecting the claim that palm trees grow in abundance in the North Pole, I included in that some other claims. Making explicit in your mind that those are the claims you accept, therefore you reject this other claim, can be really helpful to assessing the plausibility or the credibility of the claim. So I just wanted to add that into our notes before we move on to our next little section, right? So we want to look at this idea of initial plausibility. And we can just get this definition right from here in the textbook, although there is a really nice one in the review section as well. Hint, hint, that you might want to make note of. I don't really know what I'm doing there. So here we go. So initial plausibility is just a rough assessment of how credible a claim seems to us, right? Once it's gone through our little list of 3 things that we're gonna look at, we can then assign some kind of initial plausibility to the claim itself. We wouldn't want to assign initial plausibility to the source of a claim, right? That's a human being. They're not plausible, or I mean, I suppose it could also be like a news resource or something like that, but excuse me. Yeah, where the initial plausibility is just applied to the claim itself. I want to emphasize that for reasons that will become apparent later. Okay, moving on. I personally suspect that this idea of assigning claims a certain initial plausibility is just our textbook's way of trying to make more certain or accessible some reliable method of analyzing claims. But the truth is, it really is just an assessment of how well the claim fits with our background information and our personal observations, right? As well as the other claims that we are aware of. So that's all this is. It's not any mathematical concept like the language here makes it seem like it is. It's not. It's just whether or not it's a good fit. So let's talk very briefly about some claims and their initial plausibility. Right? The initial just means like when we first hear the claim, whether we think it's plausible or not. It's nothing fancy. The claim, more guitars were sold in the United States last year than saxophones, fits very well with the background information most of us have, and we would hardly require detailed evidence before accepting it. Right? So that's all we're doing when we're assigning initial plausibility and when we're assessing the claim itself is, does this fit well? Right? And I'm assuming most of us know that guitars are way more popular instruments, at least to Americans, than saxophones are. So we have tons of information. Right? We maybe have some friends who play guitar, and I don't know anyone who plays saxophone. Right? It's a general feel. So, and then I quite like this claim. So the claim, Charlie's 87-year-old grandmother swam across Lake Michigan in the middle of winter, cannot command much initial plausibility because of the obvious way it conflicts with our background information. What background information is that, right? We don't know Charlie's 87-year-old grandmother. Well, we do. We have background information about 87-year-old people. We have background information about Lake Michigan without ever, going to Lake Michigan. We have information about that. We have background information about swimming in cold water, and so on, right? So, in fact, short of observing the swim itself ourselves, it just isn't clear what could persuade us to accept such a claim, right? I would need to see, even if you showed me a video of that, I would be like, are we sure that lady is 87? Right? Maybe that's just a young woman in a wig and a warm suit that makes her look 87 or something. I don't know. We would do what I just did, which is try to make the observation fit with all this other information we have. And of course, if you personally observe something and you have gone through the ways your observation might have failed you, and you have been appropriately skeptical, and frankly, you just saw the thing you saw. There's no more to be said about it. There was no trick, and you have investigated that to see if there was a trick, right? As an observer, you weren't tired, it wasn't dark, there was nothing else going on. Then yes, adjust your beliefs and say that okay, maybe Charlie's 87-year-old grandmother did swim across Lake Michigan in the middle of the winter. But as our textbook points out, even then, we should consider the likelihood that we're being tricked or fooled by an illusion. This makes a lot of students uncomfortable because they want definite answers, and or to feel one way or another way about something. And this chapter of the textbook really focuses on saying, like, well, I don't know. Um, I'm on balance just trying to, or on balance, I'm just going to suspend judgment. I'm going to say, I don't know. Maybe that did happen, maybe it didn't. And that's what it means to consider the likelihood that we're being tricked or fooled by an illusion. It's not comfortable for a lot of people to say, I don't know, but I think it's incredibly valuable to be able to say, well, maybe I was sleepy. Maybe I was wrong. I might not have seen what I thought I saw. Despite my attempts to move quickly through this section, it seems to be taking quite some time, so I want to wrap up using this little example because I think our textbook is quite good here. So unfortunately, there are no neat formulas that can resolve conflicts between what you already believe and new information. Your job as a critical thinker is to trust your background information when considering claims that conflict with that information, that is, claims with low initial plausibility. But at the same time, keep an open mind and realize that further information may cause you to give up a claim that you had thought was true. And this is the thing I really want to emphasize, right? And when I say an open mind, I don't mean, you know, dumpster open so that you just let any trash in, right? We don't want to do that either. Just be aware. On balance, you know, be receptive to new information, but also skeptical of it. So I think they've got a great example here. I'm not a big fan of a lot of natural healing or non-traditional medicine, so my inclinations are the same as our book's authors with regard to that. But I think this example is really good because even though this is something I would normally reject, they make a really good case for it. So, for example, let's say you've been suffering from headaches and have tried all the usual methods of relief, aspirin, antihistamines, whatever your physician has recommended, and so on. Finally, a friend tells you that she has headaches that were very similar to yours, and nothing worked for her either until she had an aromatherapy treatment. Then, just a few minutes into her aromatherapy session, her headaches went away. So that's the claim we're looking at. That's the situation. So, and again, textbook authors kind of agree with me. We're not much inclined to believe that smelling oils will make your headache disappear. But we think there is little to lose and at least a small possibility of something substantial to be gained by giving the treatment a try. It may be, for example, that the treatment relaxes a person and relieves tension, which can cause headaches. But don't go into that with great expectations. So this is the kind of balancing act that you have to do, right? That seems the idea that aromatherapy is going to help somebody with chronic headaches who has sought out help from trained professionals beggars belief to me, to be completely honest. It seems insane. But again, because there is very little to lose and at least a small possibility of something substantial to be gained by giving the treatment a try, then perhaps you try that out. On balance, again, you have little to lose and a lot to gain. So why not? That's essentially the best you're going to get from this assessment of the credibility of claims themselves. So sorry it's not better than that. I would love to give you a fail-safe way to do it, but that's just not going to happen. We just have to continue to think critically about these things and be receptive to new information. So moving on, the credibility of sources. Now this section is a bit more absolute than the last section. It's not going to be wishy-washy, right? little more formalized. So we're analyzing the source of a claim. So, for example, I and our textbook are the source of the claims we're making about critical thinking. But source is going to extend to include maybe like the BBC, for example, if you use that as a news resource. So you have the individual journalist, but you also have the BBC. Or, for example, if I want to buy a new cell phone, my cell phone company is going to make claims about the phone. In that case, the company is the source of the claim. So a source doesn't just have to be one individual or even a human being. It could be a company or something like that. This has been a cause for confusion in previous classes, so just make sure you make note. It doesn't have to be a human individual to be the source of a claim. I think the example here is quite fun. We're automatically suspicious of certain sources of information. For example, if you were getting a divorce, you wouldn't ordinarily turn to your spouse's attorney for advice. Right? You're gonna be a bit skeptical that that person has your best interests in mind. So we're gonna just break down the factors that should influence how much credence we give to a source. So the first thing we're gonna look at is whether or not somebody is an interested party. I should add something to this, right? This is just the source is just the entity making the claim. Right, so interested parties. I want to emphasize here that interested doesn't mean interesting. It doesn't mean you're riveted or excited about something. Like I might say I was interested in that movie. That's not the sense in which we're using the word interested for this part of our textbook, or really at all in this class. So what are interested parties? And they have disinterested parties too, which I'm really not going to emphasize because it's just the opposite of interest. So an interested party is a person or entity who stands to gain from our belief in a claim. Right? So let's just put that in our notes here. A person who stands to gain from our belief in a claim. This could be anyone. For example, my cell phone company stands to gain from me believing that their cell phone is the best cell phone out there. Right? In that case, it's monetary gain, but gain doesn't have to be monetary. It could be, I don't know, maybe you want to adopt a kitten and you tell the adoption agency, I'm so good with cats and I have a massive farm that the cat can frolic safely on and all these things. You don't want money, you want a kitten. You are, in that case, an interested party. And rightly so, the kitten adoption agency might say, well, I'm not so sure you're a reliable source of information about that. Maybe I would like to ask somebody else whether or not you have lots of places for the kitten to frolic or something like that. It's not hard to see how you would be the least reliable source of information about that, potentially, because you are interested, because you have an interest. You stand to gain, in this case, a kitten, from somebody believing your claims. So we have one more thing to really say about interested parties for our notes. Interested parties should be viewed with much more suspicion than disinterested parties who have no stake in our belief one way or another. And if you'd like to put all of that in your notes, I think that's probably a good thing to have around. That's not what I wanted to do. There we go. All right. So, and we don't need to define disinterested parties. It's just right here. There's somebody who have no stake in our belief one way or another. So, if somebody who didn't particularly care about what happened to the kitten confirmed, yes, she has a massive farm with places for the kitten to frolic. That would be a disinterested party, and they would be viewed with less suspicion than I myself was. In this case, because they have nothing to gain from lying or from saying something untrue or persuading. Right? They simply have no reason to. I'm not inclined to agree with the textbook here, but I do think it's worth looking at. So they claim that it would be hard to overestimate the importance of this rule. In fact, if you were to only learn one thing from this book, this would be a good candidate. But, it is worth noting that not all interested parties are out to hoodwink or lie or steal to us. In the case of the kitten, I might have a strong interest in getting the kitten, but I could very well be completely honest about whether or not I could accommodate a kitten, right? And certainly not all disinterested parties have good information, right? So I have a strong personal interest in teaching you guys this information. And I do have something to gain. It is my job. This is my source of income. But that alone doesn't seem to be enough for you to view the information I'm giving you with suspicion. In fact, I doubt that a disinterested party would be as well suited to do this job. It needs to be important to me. I need to think that this information is valuable. I need to have a bit of bias, and the monetary incentive certainly helps out. And I would say maybe makes me do a better job than if I were just doing this for free. I really don't know. I might not do it at all if I were doing it for free, but I don't think the textbook really emphasizes this idea enough that a mere interest on its own doesn't give you cause to think that you're being misled. It just means you should be a bit more suspicious. Does this person have some potential ulterior motive to get me to believe this thing? So that's all. I want to move on to this next section, but not spend too long on it because I think it's obvious. So again, just to remind everyone, we're looking at the source of the claim. Maybe I should make these bold and larger so that they look a little better organized. So we're looking at the source of the claim, and we've talked about interested parties, and then the textbook has this strange thing: physical and other characteristics. We're not going to add that to our list of things to consider when we're considering the source. I think it's a bit tricky the way the textbook has organized this. But we are going to talk about them. So the feature of being an interested or disinterested party is highly relevant to whether he, she, it, or they should be trusted. Unfortunately, we often base our judgments on irrelevant considerations. Let's just highlight that. Physical characteristics, for example, tell us little about a person's credibility or its lack. That's weird. So does a person look you in the eye? Does he perspire a lot? Does he have a nervous laugh? Despite being generally worthless in this regard, such characteristics are widely used in sizing up a person's credibility. They shouldn't be, right? There are lots of reasons a person might not make eye contact. There's lots of reasons a person might be sweaty or have a nervous laugh, right? These are not legitimate considerations, as the textbook calls it. They're generally worthless with regard to evaluating a person's credibility. Believing that you have some magical ability to tell whether or not somebody is being honest with you. Well, you can, focus on that and maybe learn better strategies and tactics. Can also lead you to making some really awful judgments about people based on their physical characteristics. So again, simply being louder, taller, more assertive, those things shouldn't enhance a person's credibility. But it looks like they do. And if you want more research on that, again, you can just check our citation and look at that Stanford study. This puts you in this really awful position where a practiced con artist can imitate a confident teller of truth, right? If you rely on physical characteristics or habits, gestures, those sorts of things, you're setting yourself up to be lied to, right? There's a funny little snippet on the page prior about this. The other problem is this has been used historically in kind of racist or bigoted ways. There's actually some researchers in Australia who think that you can draw conclusions about somebody's character and health based on facial structures. So, we've got this hilarious picture of John McCain and this analysis of him. These are not reliable. There used to be something like this employed in criminology, and surprise, surprise, the physical characteristics they said made people more likely to be criminals were physical characteristics that minority races had. So this leads to bigotry pretty quickly, and it's just generally really bad. I'm laughing because it's so foolish, and also because of this picture of John McCain. But I can't emphasize enough, these are not reliable assessments of anyone's characteristics. So let's move on beyond this. I don't feel the need to tell you guys over and over again that you can't use these things and that it's very dangerous thinking if you start to try to use these things to assess the reliability of a source of a claim. So if we're not allowed to judge a book by its cover, what can we do other than asking whether or not a party is an interested or disinterested party? Well, expertise is really the name of the game here. So let's add this to our notes, and this is going to break down into kind of two sections. They all have E in them. Exciting. So expertise. Much of our information comes from people about whom we have no reason to suspect prejudice, bias, or any of the other features that make interested parties bad sources. However, we might still doubt a source's actual knowledge of the issue in question. A source's knowledge depends on a number of factors, especially expertise and experience. Right? So these are our two E's that I was very excited about. Memorize them: expertise and experience. So let's move relatively quickly through this. How do you judge a person's expertise? Simply, education and experience are the most important factors, followed by accomplishments, reputation, and position in no particular order. So let's add this to our notes. But really what we want here is education and experience. So we've talked about the fact that I am an interested party to some degree with regard to your education. But I gain some credibility because I am educated in this field. That is a good reason to think that I have expertise with regard to the issues that we're discussing in this class. And the more I teach, the more experience I have teaching them. Right? So if, your friend told you that you didn't need to change the oil in your car ever again, I don't know. Like, I just heard that oil changes are a scam. And they had no education and they were not an experienced mechanic, you would probably not believe them. even if they were completely disinterested, even if they had nothing to gain from you believing or disbelieving that claim. It'd just be due to a lack of expertise. You'd be like, who are you? Why are you telling me about my car? That seems strange. Right, that's just a recognition that education and experience play a huge role in that. If this person had, however, a great reputation with cars, or they had built their own car, that might give you a little bit of reason to believe them. But again, that claim kind of itself on its face is absurd. So it likely wouldn't even make it to evaluating the source of the claim. We wouldn't even have to go that far. As you guys know, I like to argue on the internet, and there's a thing I have noticed that happens sometimes that I want to take a moment to talk about. Education includes, but is not strictly limited to, formal education, the possession of degrees from established institutions of learning. I see people claim all the time that they have studied something, and I have no doubt that they have read a lot about it. Maybe they have a strong interest in, I don't know, history. But I'm disinclined to count that as education, because I don't know what standards their information has been held to. And this is why I want to limit this to formal education from established institutions of learning. I'm not trying to be hoity-toity or dismissive. It's that established institutions of learning, I know what their standards are. We have a very strict set of standards for accreditation, and if somebody has a degree from the school, I can simply say, okay, I know what standards that school holds their students to and what they require someone to do in order to gain that degree. So, some doctors of this and that receive their diplomas from mail order houses that advertise on matchbook covers. It's less matchbook covers now, but if any of you watch Comedy Central, I've noticed late at night there are advertisements for unaccredited online schools that they're I don't want to call them fake schools, but they are not established institutions of learning. They are not accredited. That's not going to count as an education. So, and if that sounds hoity-toity, let's ask if this person was claiming to be a surgeon and they got their degree from a university that they learned about in the middle of the night on Comedy Central, and they did it in 2 months, you probably wouldn't let that person perform surgery on you. So, just this is why we have this establishment education system. Even though it sounds kind of ivory tower, be proud you guys chose to go to a real school. And on to experience. For evaluating experience, we're looking at both the kind and the amount, right? Somebody might have a great deal of experience in a tangentially related field, or maybe it's not hands-on. Maybe they've just been watching. To continue with the mechanic example, maybe somebody's parent is a mechanic and they grew up watching their parents work on cars, but they themselves have no direct experience with working on cars. So this is what we mean when we say the kind of experience. Very briefly, accomplishments are an important indicator of someone's expertise, but only when those accomplishments are directly related to the question at hand. I quite like the example here. A Nobel Prize winner in physics is not necessarily qualified to speak publicly about toy safety, public school education, even in science, or nuclear proliferation, right? So you might be inclined to say, well, a Nobel Prize winner in physics knows a lot about nuclear technology. Well, nuclear proliferation is the distribution of, or the gaining of nuclear capabilities by various countries. This is a geopolitical issue. It is not a matter of physics, right? Uh, so even though it's tangentially related, they're not necessarily qualified to give us information about that, right? Nor with toy safety or public school education, even in science, right? Because these people are not specialized in education, quite simply. So stay in your lanes. um, but I feel like that's just about everything we need to say about this. And we're almost ready to move on. I do apologize for the length of this lecture, but I promise it won't be longer than a lecture in person would be. I won't do that to you guys. I just want to emphasize again what we've talked about so far, because we are ready to move on to the new stuff that I'm including in this lecture. But this has mostly been about credibility, and we have focused on the claim themselves, or the claim itself, and then the source of the claim, the entity making the claim, and how to analyze these for credibility. So this next section is news media, and we're unlikely to make any notes on it. So sit back, relax, and just kind of generally take in the information that we're about to cover. All right, so to begin, credibility and the news media. So what happened, you guys? What happened to the news media? They've got this great quote from President Thomas Jefferson. The only security of all is in a free press. The force of public opinion cannot be resisted when permitted freely to be expressed. The agitation it produces must be submitted to. It is necessary to keep the waters pure. How noble. This is why we have a First Amendment. People really believed in this. But as our textbook authors point out, the waters have become less pure over the last few decades, and the press has fallen on hard times. How did that happen? How did we get here? Well, our textbook is going to suggest that the consolidation of media ownership, it plays a relevant role. I'm not sure if I'm persuaded by this argument, but I think this is good information to have. So, although it's not well known to most citizens, the media have become controlled by fewer and fewer corporations, the result of many mergers and buyouts over the past 3 decades or so. Now, here's the information. Since 2001, when the Federal Communications Commission loosened the regulation regarding ownership of newspapers, radio stations, and television stations, the concentration of media in fewer and fewer hands has been accelerating. Essentially, we've gone from thousands of independent media outlets in the mid-20th century to only 50 companies by 1983. So this has gotten worse, much, much worse. At the time this textbook was written, which is only a few years ago, approximately 90% of all media companies in the United States were controlled by just 5 companies. Those 5 companies, if you're interested, are Time Warner, Disney, oh, those guys, right? You don't think of Disney as insidious, or maybe you do. News Corp, Comcast, and Viacom/CBS. Okay, did I get all 5? I missed one. Anyway, no, I didn't. Okay, excellent. All right, and you can see in the parentheses the companies that, or the subsidiaries of these companies. So this might already kind of have been illuminating for you, because you might see that certain companies have a bit of a tone to them. So I think News Corp illustrates this the best. Fox News, Wall Street Journal, New York Post, etc. I don't know about you guys, but I know that these media outlets tend to promote a similar viewpoint, and that should not be surprising to us, because they are all owned by the same company. If you want to have a problem with this, that's fine. If you don't want to have a problem with that, that's fine. Maybe this is just the way capitalism works. But it is worth noting that no matter what you see on television, the great likelihood is that one or more of those companies had a hand in producing it or getting it to your screen. The fewer hands that control the media, the easier it is for the news to get managed, either by the owners themselves or by their commercial advertisers, or even, as we'll talk about next, the government. So, yeah, this take it or leave it. Effectively, it is worth noting, though, that when you have a very small group of people controlling the vast majority of the information we receive, the easier it is to propagate myths, set a national tone, direct conversations, and for that reason alone, I think we should be a bit skeptical, especially if we only hear the same claim coming all from the same source, right? And I don't mean to pick out News Corp. I'm not a huge fan of any of these guys. It's just these are quite accessible and tend to be political, so it's more easy to illustrate with this example. We do tend to see the same types of claims coming from these outlets. Okay, moving on. Government management of the news. This is what I really wanted to talk about and why I thought this section was so important right now. So, they're a bit silly about this. For a while there, our only known source of fake news was The Daily Show, right, which was comedy. But the federal government got into the fake news business as well. I think that's a pretty big claim. So we should ask, as good critical thinkers, well, what do you mean by that? And they just keep saying fake news, which admittedly irritates me. But what they're talking about here is news reports paid for by the government, placed on television, that tout the virtues of government plans. I'm not going to say schemes because I think that biases the thing we're talking about, including, prescription drug programs, airport safety, education programs, these sorts of things. You may have seen them. I know I have. So, well, then I got ad block, so thank goodness for that. The problem with this, and the reason our textbook and I are upset about this, is that no criticism of the program was included. No mention was made that these were not independent news reports. It was concealed from us that these were interested parties giving us this information, right? If the government, your source of this claims, this information, is just telling you how good it is, we don't even need to go back to our notes to say this is an entity that stands to gain from our belief in their claims that these programs are a great success. So, back to the textbook. This is why it's important to note that no mention was made that these were not independent news reports, right? There was, in this instance, I don't want to say a cover-up, but frankly, that's the best way to put this. There's an obfuscation of the fact that the people making these claims, or the entity making these claims, was in fact an interested party. That should make us very skeptical. Of course, it doesn't amount to a dismissal of the information itself. We should still look at the actual claim and analyze it, but we have very good reason to be skeptical now. What happens is that these advertisements, if you will, provide materials, like viewing material, for stations that cannot afford to produce a full plate of news themselves. And that's many, many stations across the country. And ultimately, the result is many viewers accept as news what is essentially official propaganda. And I don't want to taint things by using the word propaganda. Propaganda is just something that promotes a policy or a program or something like that. So it's just important to distinguish between the biased promotion of something and actual news and actual news report. So leaving aside news reporting, problems also crop up on the op-ed page. So op-eds are opinion and editorial pieces, as we see right here. That's what op-ed means. So these people are using opinion differently to how we use it in this class. And then television commentaries or pundits, as you may have heard them called, are usually presumed to present the opinions of the writers or speakers who write and speak them. But as it turned out, some of those are bought and paid for as well. So they've got a great example here from 2005. This syndicated columnist, Michael Manus, was paid $10,000 by the Department of Health and Human Services for writing positively about one of its government programs. And this is why it is their favorite example. His column is titled Ethics and Religion. So we have this fellow who may be trusted, he may be a trusted journalist, being paid $10,000 by a government department to write positively about one of that department's programs. This is, I don't want to call it evil, but this is obviously not news. And these are not credible claims anymore. We have no reason to believe he's making these claims out of an interest in informing the public or out of good journalistic intentions. He was paid $10,000 to say these things by our government. That's tax money right there. So that's not distressing enough to you. This next bit, maybe. The military also has a media branch. They specifically disallowed photographs to be taken of the coffins of slain American soldiers when they were being brought home from Iraq, which is upsetting. But this one really shocks me. I don't know if you guys remember this, but Private Jessica Lynch was stuck in Iraq in a hospital in 2003. Her rescue, the footage of it, amounts to being staged. It was, here's the word, highly staged rescue. There's lots of information about this online if you want to look at it more. I am certainly not saying it was a bad thing that she was rescued. It's just important to recognize that very interested parties gave us a very specific narrative of what was happening, and there was limited access to the actual information about what happened. This is very distressing to me, and we need to be aware that this happens. I'm not suggesting that this should be illegal or that we should all become conspiracy theorists or anything like that. It's just a very important part of how we got to where we are with regard to the credibility of the news media. The last thing I want to talk to you guys about today is bias within the media. It's commonly said that the media are politically biased. Conservatives are convinced that they being the news media, or the media itself, have a liberal bias, and liberals are convinced that the bias favors conservatives. The usual basis for the conservative assessment is that, generally speaking, reporters and editors are more liberal than the general population. And there's some research that indicates that this is indeed the case, right? There are several polls that you can access. However, on the other hand, publishers and owners of media outlets tend to be conservative, not surprisingly, since they have an orientation that places a higher value on the bottom line. They're in business to make a profit, simply. Um, there are virtues to both of these claims, uh, and I tend to agree yet again with our textbook. Making an assessment is miles beyond my scope as well. I'm not equipped to tell you who is right or who is wrong, or if everyone's right or everyone's wrong. There's not enough time in all of college to really draw that out. But it is important to be aware that a reporter or columnist or broadcaster who draws conclusions without presenting sufficient evidence is no more to be believed than some guy down the street, even if the conclusions happen to correspond nicely with your own bias. Indeed, especially if they correspond with your own bias. This is healthy skepticism. This is what I think this class is all about. Um, being aware that conclusions without sufficient evidence are unreliable. And once we notice that insufficient evidence has been provided for a claim, even if we really like the conclusion, maybe especially if we really like the conclusion, we need to remain skeptical. So the textbook goes on to say, what is important to remember is that there are many forces at work in the preparation of news besides the desire to publish or broadcast the whole truth. And of course, these interests influence what we end up with. What follows in the textbook is great, but I don't want to spend very much time focusing on it. There's essentially a list of what the authors of this textbook consider reliable news sources. I think this is great if you are ever assigned a research paper or something like that, and you ask what is acceptable research or what is an acceptable source. But one last note, and then we will be done. So, Wikipedia. We all know what it is. And I've got this tone now that may be conveying to you that we should all know as college students how to feel about Wikipedia. And that it's not a reliable source. I don't agree with that, and neither does our textbook. Let's talk about what Wikipedia actually is. Wiki refers to a collaborative voluntary association, although the word seems to have been coined by a programmer named Ward Cunningham from the Hawaiian term wiki-wiki, which means quick, or quick. Wikipedia is really interesting. Its content and structure is determined entirely by its users. And that accounts for its major strengths as well as major weaknesses. But it does have strengths, and I'm going to sing to you the unsung song of Wikipedia. It is sourced. There are citations. I'm sure you've noticed those obnoxious little numbers in brackets that link to something. If something is posted and edited to a Wikipedia page, somebody has to provide a source, or if they cannot, then in brackets will be the information citation needed. It's a great resource. It's very fast, as this mentions, and it gives you a massive scope of information. So when you're in a class and you're assigned a research paper or told to do research or something along those lines, your instructor may tell you not to use Wikipedia. That's fair. However, I agree entirely with the textbook right here. Wikipedia is an excellent starting point in a search for knowledge about a topic. I also use it frequently, but you need to check the sources provided in Wikipedia. It shouldn't be your sole source of information if the topic is important to you or it's become part of an assignment to be turned in for class. It is not full of lies. It is not that easily edited. That is greatly overstated. I'm not really sure why people hate on Wikipedia. I think it's really well sourced. The trick to using it is just to use the sources that are provided in Wikipedia. Investigate those. It's not enough to just go to Wikipedia and stop your search there. Go look at the articles that these claims are derived from, and then go through this process where you assess the claim itself. And then you assess the source of that claim. Very rarely are you going to find anything that, just outright conflicts with personal observations and such. These things are usually at least that reliable, but you need to assess each of these claims individually and make use of the sources that are available to you. So, sorry, that's my personal rant, and I had to go on it because I'm really frustrated by people dismissing Wikipedia out of hand as a good resource. It is a great starting point, and I encourage people to actually look at how it functions and understand how it functions rather than dismissing it out of hand. Okay, so that is everything. Thank you guys for sitting through that additional section on the media, specifically the news media. I would love feedback on it in any form. So let me know what you think, and I will see you next week.